There we go.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good deal. Thank you so much for having me again. It's really nice to be able to like come back, and even though I'm not really there, like to see familiar faces and beginning to know you guys a little bit. And thank you for. I was thinking earlier as I was kind of doing my last minute stuff before I signed on, like how grateful I am just for the opportunity to be able to develop a little bit more as a teacher. To have the opportunity to do this. Because it's really new for me, and I'm kind of trying to figure out who I am and how I am and all that kind of stuff. And like I think anything, like there's a fair amount of like imposter syndrome stuff. Like should I even be the one on here talking about this? Um, but at the same time, I think about Rinpoche, and I think about us doing the retreat, and I think in particular about the last time. It's funny I mentioned the last time I saw him, last time I was here, but one of the other things he said on the last day that we saw him at the 3-year retreat, it was weird because it was like 7 or 8 months before the end of the retreat, and he said to us, kind of out of nowhere, "You've all received all the training necessary to be called lamas." And like that to me has kind of been something I come back to a lot because I don't necessarily feel that way. But then I remember like Rinpoche said that. So I'm gonna keep doing it, because that's what he said. And I'm really glad that I was able to hear him say that. I think it would have been really hard not to have heard that. I don't know that I would be able to go on and do this if I hadn't actually heard him say that. So um, anyway, I've still got a lot of work to do, and I've still got all kinds of problems. And anything I'm sharing is really just sharing what I'm working on too, for sure. So it's super helpful to me to be able to talk about this stuff and share what I have learned. And I know there's a lot of people who have practiced a lot longer than me, and I celebrate all of your merit and all of your practice, and I welcome all the dialogue that we have afterwards and in between and everything. So thank you guys so much. And so today I picked a new three series of threes. Three is my favorite number. So I did the last time we did the 3 marks. This time I want to talk about the 3 commitments. And the main reason I wanted to do this is because I've been working through Pema Chodron's book, Living Beautifully with Uncertainty and Change, and really loving it. And also because I love how she drew a parallel between the lines "do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha," and the 3 main kinds of vows that we encounter in Tibetan Buddhism. So we'll talk more about that today, but in particular, those 4 lines, "do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha," has been a real comfort to me because that is kind of my anchor. Whenever anything seems too complex or challenging, or I'm just not getting it, or I'm over my head, like I can come back to that because that sums it all up. I mean, that is the teaching of the Buddha, and anything else that we hear is some exposition of that. And so if we feel like we're not getting it, or if we feel like we're not sure if something is the teaching of the Buddha, like those 4 lines are a good way of kind of checking, and bringing things back down to earth. So that said, there's 3 main things I want to talk about in this talk of the first of the 3 commitments, and those are reactivity, reflective refraining, and waking up. And a main practice that Pema Chodron gives in this first section of the book that I want to say right up top. She says, "Be fully present, feel your heart, and engage the next moment without an agenda." And I've been thinking about that a lot since I started working on this talk. That also is just a really good, simple instruction. Be fully present, feel your heart, engage the next moment without an agenda. So the last time around, we talked about no self, which was super complex talk about how things don't exist. They appear to be a self, but it's actually no self. It appears to be a single thing, but it's a collection of things. It appears to be permanent, but it's always changing. And so those topics about the three marks of existence were really in order to increase our awareness about our situation, because it's awareness that counteracts ignorance. And our ultimate goal on the path is Buddhahood, which means to be fully awake. That's what Buddha means, the awakened one. So we mean awakening from the sleep of ignorance. And it's an important reminder because we're not trying to become some idealized hero figure who lived 2,500 years ago. We ourselves are trying to awaken from ignorance. And we can wake up. And when we do, we too will be Buddha, will awakened. Therefore will also be called Buddha, awakened one. So in discussing the three marks, the three things that all existence seems to be marked with, we took some steps towards being able to wake up. And with impermanence, we learned about how things are. They're constantly changing. And with suffering, we talked about several ways that our clinging repeatedly causes our discomfort. And with no self, we learned how things are not. Self appears, yet it arises as no self. We did talk about some practical means for waking up to the three marks of existence in everything we see. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche has said, along with many other great teachers, in order to attain liberation, the only thing you need to eliminate is this false imputation of inherent existence to experiences, this false imputation of absolute reality or truth. He said, if things are recognized as interdependent, they cannot harm you, and there is no need to avoid them or attempt to cause them to cease. It is through our failure to recognize interdependence, our false imputation of the inherent existence of what we experience, as well as our false imputation of our own inherent existence, that makes us spin around in samsara. We must come to realize that everything we experience is interdependent, like the images of a dream or the reflection in a mirror, and that experiences cannot and do not occur without the necessary causes and conditions. Nothing we experience, including ourselves, is an independent identity. That is the correct understanding of conventional reality, and that correct understanding will automatically diminish the false apprehension of inherent existence. And it's part of that quote where he says, we must come to realize that everything we experience is interdependent, like the images of a dream, that inspired the title for this series, Living the Dream in the Three Commitments. So in this last 3 sessions I did for you, we discovered a whole lot about our dreamlike existence. In this series, we'll focus primarily on how we can live happier, more awakened lives, living in accord with our actual mode of existence. In other words, recognizing that everything we experience is interdependent, like the images of a dream. What should we do or not do in response to this dream? How do we react? That's what we'll be discussing. And as always, I would encourage you to recall and utilize the 3 stages of practice: listening, contemplating, and meditating. Throughout the presentation, I'd encourage you to simply listen, meaning allow yourself to be open to new information or information you've heard before. Simply be open and attentive. You may, as I do in these talks, feel the urge to react to things that the teacher's saying. And you could react in any number of ways, but there'll probably all be some sort of analysis or comparison or contemplation. And I'd encourage you, for your own benefit, to simply notice those reactions and return your attention to the flow of information. Then, when we have time for questions at the end, but more importantly, later tonight, tomorrow, and beyond, I definitely encourage you to contemplate what you heard tonight. Many of us have a real strong interest in thinking things through, analyzing and testing. And this is a really important step. But in order to accurately analyze something, we need the purest data possible, information untainted by our own opinions, projections, and fears. So hearing new information that's challenging or appealing or seemingly unimportant, like meeting with any situation that's challenging, appealing, or seemingly unimportant, will undoubtedly trigger certain habitual strategies for us. Strategies like that may have seemed to have some utility at some point in our lives, but then they gradually became just reactive tendencies, like mindless impulses. So if you, like me, have a strong desire to analyze what you're hearing, I encourage you to treat the talk itself as your data collection time, with the understanding that you'll absolutely utilize the data for the real analytical work that needs to be done, which is your own contemplation. But that contemplation should occur after the talk and beyond. That's when you need to do your own testing in your own laboratory, as the Buddha himself implored us to do. Contemplation is essential to integrating the teachings, but it's vital we don't mix our listening and our contemplating too much. A little bit's inevitable, but let's try to weight things towards openness of being fully present during the teaching, with the understanding that we'll absolutely engage in contemplation afterwards. Contemplation is perhaps more important to our own development, but if we want to get the most out of it, we need to listen purely first. And finally, the most important step is meditation. We have to meditate and maintain some daily practice of meditation. Even just 5 minutes of calm abiding a day is of benefit. And in our meditation, we allow all the waves of conceptuality from our listening and our contemplative stages to recede back into the limitless ocean of awareness that is our true nature already, right now. Those waves of conceptuality arose from the ocean of awareness. They were never separate from it, and they will inevitably return to it. And when they do, we have not lost them. So in our meditation, we allow those waves of conceptuality to recede, resting our mind as we have been trained with no more engagement in analysis or contemplation. We simply allow meditation to occur. We get out of its way and just let it happen. So before we really begin, let's, with the intention of fully waking up, let us generate bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, with the aspiration that our time here today will be a benefit to all sentient beings. We'll say the prayer of refuge 3 times, once in Tibetan, once in English, and once in Tibetan. While we chant the beautiful Tibetan melody, let's be sure to recall the meaning of what we're chanting. In particular, from this moment forward, we'll only seek our protection in ways and from sources that will do no harm to others or ourselves, because that is the path by which true happiness can be attained. O Sangye Chidang Soki Chodnam La Janchu Padu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Daki Jinso Gipe Sunam Ki Rola Penchi Sangye Drupasho. I take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the noble Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. O Sangye Chidang Soki Chodnam La Janchu Padu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Daki Jinso Kipe Sunam Ki Rola Penchi Sangye Drupasho. Aden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwa Pele Den Jula Aden Chambo Koneje Sunte Kusun Tuking Yujub Sadu So. Let's take just a moment and rest our attention on the breath for a little bit of shamatha. Just a couple minutes. there's a lot of parallels with shamatha and this first commitment of doing no harm. And in a way, we could almost say that that practice itself is a practice of that commitment. Thinking of our life and our experience itself and our experience of a self as being like a river is a common analogy. And there's good reason for that. Like a river, we are process, constantly in motion. A river flows and picks things up along the way. It accumulates. Sometimes a tree branch will be swept away and deposited miles away. So it accumulates and it relinquishes. It rises and it falls. Similarly, we're in motion in terms of apparent spatial and temporal movement, but also in terms of seeming accumulation of memories, experiences, tendencies, and if we're lucky, some beneficial practice along the way too. We also experience the fruition of past karma and sometimes leave behind old opinions and habits. We also leave behind some physical capabilities as we age. When we think, what we think of as a self is an ever-changing collection, just like a river is always made up of different water. If we took a snapshot of one bend in a river, the water in our picture and much of what's in it will be gone just a short while later. But we still agree to call whatever water is in that specific place at a given time the river. We're talking about an entirely different set of water, but we still find some basic utility in calling it a river. We give a single conceptual title to something that is an ever-changing collection, because there's some usefulness in being able to talk about that particular kind of a collection in that particular place. And it's a similar situation with each of us and who we are, and others and what they think we are. Impermanence is the actual state of things. And in our experience, that translates as uncertainty, an ever-present, though rarely noticed, sense of groundlessness. Even though it is the actual state of things, when we do unexpectedly meet with a strong sense of that groundlessness, a strong reminder of our actual state, the most common reaction is to resist it and to distract ourselves from it via acting out in some way or another, or through actively repressing our emotions. And in those ways, we ignore our true nature and the true nature of everything. We put ourselves to sleep in a moment when we have the greatest potential to wake up. Now, a talk like this might be quite different. We come to a Dharma talk expecting to hear about groundlessness. So our expectation of hearing about groundlessness is met, and that is ironically comforting ground, right? We've prepared ourselves for a mental journey into the concepts of non-conceptuality that occurs, and we can, if we're not careful, walk away feeling even more fixated on our self-concepts. I, myself, am someone who likes to learn about no self. It's as if, from a brief examination of the general concept of impermanence and interdependence, we can generate and then cling to a vague, deceptive brand of false certainty. And that helps us to paper over our reactivity, our resistance to the actual groundless state of things. The only thing we can count on is change. Feels kind of empowering to say and to distract ourselves with. But if we really meant it, how much more empowering would it actually be? But the problem is we haven't really realized impermanence. Talking about it, thinking about it, hoping we can always understand it are important steps. But at some point, we need to recognize that what we cling to in these situations is frequently some kind of distraction, a manifestation of our ignorance. We don't like to be reminded of life's uncertainty unless it's on our own predetermined terms. Rather than being present with the many instances of simple groundlessness found throughout every day, we tend to divert into concepts and ideas, thinking. That's not to say that we cannot one day wake up and realize our full Buddha potential and thereby embrace both groundlessness and its myriad manifestations. In the long term, that is absolutely our goal, and it is achievable. But we have to be ready for a long journey to that ultimate goal, a potentially quite long path towards full awakening. In the short term, day to day and moment to moment, our primary mission is to do everything we can to become more skillful at working with reality as we experience it. And we do experience it as a mix of conceptual understanding about groundlessness, punctuated by frequent unsettling upswells of resistance to that very groundlessness. Moment to moment, we're either waking up or we're going to sleep. And perhaps counterintuitively, going to sleep generally takes a lot more effort than waking up. Why is that? Because of our reactivity. We keep thinking we need to react to every instance of groundlessness in our lives. And those reactions of acting out and repression are kind of exhausting. They burden us with so much avoidable discomfort. In order to wake up, rather than constantly reacting, there are methods of just relaxing into the natural state of things. And perhaps counterintuitively, it takes a lot less work to wake up than it does to go to sleep. But we need to know how. So one way the Buddha taught was through the three commitments or the three vows. And there's that parallel here with do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. These lines summarize the entirety of what the Buddha taught. And that's what the Dharma indicates, what the Buddha taught. And it means just the way things are. So as Khenpo Ken Holmes pointed out, it may sound a little exotic to us to say things like the Buddha taught the Dharma, but it's really as simple as simply saying the one who's awake taught how things are. He was awake to the actual state of things and shared what he knew. And all the complexity of teachings, all of the vast and deep Dharma can be summed up in those lines. So Pema Chodron summarized those first three lines a little differently as she connected them to these commitments. And she phrased them as committing to do no harm, which is what we're talking about today, committing to take care of one another, and committing to embrace the world just as it is. The first of these commitments is traditionally called the pratimoksha vows, which are the vows of personal liberation. And these vows help us to reduce our negative impact on ourselves and others through teaching us clearly what we should refrain from doing and familiarizing us with what it feels like to refrain in a beneficial way. The second commitment, committing to take care of one another, is traditionally called the bodhisattva vow, which teaches us what there is to be done and how to do it most beneficially. And the third commitment, committing to embrace the world just as it is traditionally called the samaya vow, which teaches us to meet everything we encounter as a manifestation of awakened energy, and also as the essential means of awakening further. So today we're going to talk about the first of these, the commitment to doing no harm. We've already discussed a bit about our habitual reactivity and how it's impeding our ability to wake up to our ever-present groundless state. Instead of resting in the actual state of things, the positive aspect of uncertainty and groundlessness, we have created and tend to cling to an illusion that comfort and security are the natural state. And under that erroneous assumption, whenever we find ourselves not feeling perfectly comfortable and secure, we react as if something's gone horribly wrong. And all of our attention shifts away from authentic engagement with the present moment, meaning being awake. And instead, we pick up a hopeless effort at eliminating the uncertainty and the discomfort. And of course, it's never worked, which is why it keeps coming back. It's tragic, really, because the actual state of things is uncertainty. And that doesn't have to be negative. But because we haven't come to grips with how things really are, we're uncomfortable whenever we feel that uncertainty. So we're uncomfortable with the actual state of things. And then we try to ignore that discomfort with reactivity through acting out or repressing rather than getting at what's really the heart of the matter, which is simply waking up to how things are. The uncertainty is not the problem. Interdependence is not a problem. Delayed packages, incorrect fast food orders, surprisingly bad drivers are not the problem. Our resistance to fundamental groundlessness is the problem. We feel restless and uneasy until we've reassured ourselves that we finally got it figured out. But we can never really say we have it all figured out. That feeling of, this is the answer, finally, is false. It's a distraction, especially whenever we cling to it. That feeling itself is what we call fundamentalism. It's manufacturing a conceptual monument, like building an edifice, and then we cling to it as being the truth, even when it runs contrary to what's actually always a state of uncertainty. And fundamentalism arises from a fixed sense of identity, fixation of the idea that we are such and such kind of person. I'm the kind of person who, of course, I get upset when, if this happens again, boy, I'm really going to be upset. When we are fixated on some kind of identity, we occupy ourselves with rearranging our world to fit our creation or illusion. And meditation is actually a really good first step towards dismantling that creation in a healthy way. It can be challenging because so much of our time up to now has been dedicated to reinforcing that creation of an identity. And we trained ourselves to find challenges to our fixed identity unpleasant, and reinforcement of our self-identity as pleasant. That's a learned metric. It's not a universal truth. Think about if you think you're a nice person and you meet someone and they think you're a nice person, it's nice to be around them, right? That's a pleasant person. Or if you think that you're a very clear speaker and someone doesn't understand what you're saying, why don't they understand what's going on? Like, not quite a pleasant experience, right? Or if someone doesn't like you, or doesn't like things about you, that's unpleasant. That's a challenge to our self-identity in those circumstances. Our feelings of discomfort when that identity is challenged is what we call shempa in Tibetan. It's a sense of getting hooked. And it's often a physical sensation as well as a mental one. It can get triggered in an instant. You've all experienced it probably today, even. I'd be shocked if you haven't. But it's that sense of like when you turn a corner and there's the traffic jam, or there's dirty microwave in the office, or someone starts doing construction during your meditation session, and you usually feel something tighten up, like that's to me is the physical sensation. I'd encourage you to try to become familiar with what your Shenpa feels like, what it feels like for you, like key in to what that physically feels like when you do get hooked, because that physical reminder is a good warning sign, that it's time to start being a little extra mindful about your behavior and your thoughts. So working with Shenpa can be a lot like the mindfulness practices that have been developed for pain management. In those methods, instead of trying to distract from pain, we actually try to pay attention to wherever the pain is. But we don't get involved with the stories or opinions about the pain. We simply open to the experience of the pain and try to be present with that, breathe with that sensation. And interestingly, what's been shown is that the result of that, of putting our attention on the pain, is a decrease in perceived discomfort. And that has a lot to do with not getting into the stories. And we can work with Shenpa in the same way. When we feel some kind of disturbance of our comfort and security, that upheaval of strong energy, instead of retreating into distraction and stories, we can simply open ourselves up to the sensation and the feeling. And that's the core, really, of what we're talking about today. It can be challenging, but making a concerted effort to simply be with the felt sensation without a story can rapidly transform our experience of it. And it can help us to see that it was never the energy itself that was the problem. It was our stories about it. It wasn't even our getting hooked. It was our staying hooked. And Pema Chodron brings up this great example of this 90-second rule. And she says that science has shown that the biochemical mechanism triggered by strong emotion lasts only 90 seconds. We meet with something that upsets us, and 90 seconds later, the physiological mechanism of that strong emotion has run its course. Do you believe that? Think about it for a second, because I think we need to really examine it, because it's one of those snippets we can hear and like be real enthused about it and want to believe it, or we can maybe just let it go. But it's really important. Let's think about like when something really upset us, like the last time, a specific instant where something really upset us. Did it go away in 90 seconds? In other words, what upset you? What were you doing 90 seconds later? This is important to think about because it's what we're doing 90 seconds after the stimulus that determines whether we're still feeling the mental and physical effects of it. We can keep that biochemical reaction going as long as we're telling stories and thinking about it and fixating on it. So if you think about something like that, when something really upsets you and what you were doing at that 90 seconds, of course, it's not just what happened at 90 seconds, but that's a good marker, right? Like if it's 90 seconds after something happens and you're still telling stories about it, at that point, we're keeping it rolling, you know? So we're really limited in our ability to control external phenomena, but we have this vast untapped power of impacting our internal world. When something outside of our control upsets us, how do we react? Do we even need to react? And if, before we put much conscious thought into it, we do happen to react, do we need to continue that reaction? I wanted to look up this idea because this 90-second thing, of course, I trust Pema Chodron, but I was like, what does she mean by science says? You know, so I decided to do some research and I found a number of articles about this, you know, so it's out there. And I found a quote from Psychology Today article that I thought was pretty interesting. It said, scientists say that constant reaction to things beyond our control not only creates misery, but it also shortens our lives. Chronic reactivity creates a stressful biochemical boomerang that weakens the immune system and increases the likelihood of a heart attack or a stroke. So how do we work with the strong energy of emotion? You know, how can we? I think we talked in an earlier talk about one of the practices that Pema Chodron has offered. And we don't have time to do it today. But in short, this is something you can try on your own. Calling to mind a strong emotion. Of course, you'll meet with them in real life too. But if you want to do it in the context of practice, have something in mind. And then try to just be present with the energy, the feeling, the felt sensation of that emotion without getting into stories and blame and victimhood and things like that. Because what we do with strong emotions that's so unproductive is that we tend to run away from them into the stories. We react to them either by acting out or by repressing. And the acting out could be external speech or behavior, or it could just be a mental monologue, you know. We take an escape route. And in this way, we get distracted from a genuine experience of the present moment. Instead, what happens, you know, is we could actually be present with that experience and who we authentically are in that moment. But instead, we're distracted away from the present moment and into a story. So to get to the commitment here, commitment in this context means a clearly set intention, like knowing what we're vowing. And this commitment interrupts blind reactivity. It forces us to think. It's an essential step on the path to Buddhahood, thinking about stuff, knowing what we're doing, being fully awake. And the commitment in this case is to do no harm. Traditionally, that's expressed through the pratimoksha vows, or the vows of personal liberation. These free us from the suffering of resisting our actual situation. Help us to see our habitual escape routes from the present moment, and help us to decide not to take those well-worn off-ramps from the now. So the commitments primarily are to do no harm and helping us to refrain from any harmful speech and actions. In short, they are not killing, not lying, not stealing, and not harming anyone with our sexual expression. And then there's a branch precept of not taking intoxicants. And Pema Chodron says, following the precepts gives us space to examine every nuance of the urge to express ourselves negatively. And then, when fully acknowledging our feelings, make the choice to not do anything that could cause harm. So refraining, it's important to make the distinction that refraining is different from repressing. Both acting out and repressing can be harmful to ourselves and to others. What refraining does is it creates the space for us to see our habitual reactivity clearly. We see it arise, we can watch it abide, and we may eventually see it subside. So we're present with the upswell of energy and our habitual urge to react. So there's that energy, and then there's also that habit is there. And it's not easy to just be present with that, but it is easier than one might think. And when we engage with a practice like this, we do have to maintain an attitude of compassionate self-reflection. Through this, we begin to see that we aren't bad people, that we're fundamentally good, and we happen to have some habits that have been causing us an awful lot of suffering. And this allows a positive desire to get to know those habits better so that we can begin to reduce and eliminate them. Our reactivity and our habit of reactivity strengthens negative emotions and makes the space in which we can be comfortable seem much smaller. It strengthens our illusion of self-identity. It strengthens, fundamentally, it strengthens our fixation, our attachment. Reflectively refraining allows us to connect with that fundamental uncertainty, the edgy, restless energy, Pema Chodron calls it. So we connect with that edgy, restless energy without bailing out, without pulling the ripcord. So the three commitments are not a teaching about morality. They're a highly effective method for waking up to our actual situation and making the deep changes necessary to stay awake. The skill of noticing our escape routes and not taking them is a necessary precursor to the other two commitments. It's also referred to as, this first commitment of do no harm is referred to as the narrow way, because it has clear guardrails that keep us right on the path. And in short, we can summarize it as saying, we do not speak or act out, period. So knowing our escape routes, as we said, am I getting blurry? This camera gets a little funky sometimes. Strong habits are hard to break, and no one would deny that. But if we're going to work on the strong habits, we have to begin in the easiest possible situations. In other words, we have to begin lifting the lightest weights if we ever hope to lift the heaviest ones. So we'll inevitably meet with incredibly challenging situations. But the only way we can prepare for them is working with smaller, much more frequent instances of uncertainty. And we'll have a lot of opportunities for that. We do. So it's not something we even have to go looking for. But using those opportunities, those small moments of uncertainty, and there's a lot of them in every single day, is a great way to start to work and prepare for the larger instances of uncertainty that will inevitably come about. Death is perhaps the most dawning reminder of impermanence that any of us ever face. Um, and it's fair to say that most of our practice is in preparation for death. But working with these small instances of annoyance, and disappointment and things like that, is really where we start to work on those big, huge moments of uncertainty that are inevitable. Some people may question if not doing something, like if we just aren't killing, do we have to actually take a vow? And there's a difference between simply not doing something and making a vow not to do it. Pema Chodron says that the outer renunciation is what happens when we simply refrain from something without holding a vow. But when we make a vow not to do something, such as not to speak harshly, we're not only outwardly refraining, but inwardly we're committing to being present with the uneasiness of our own energy. We're making a commitment to get to know what that feels like. Both the urge to speak or act out and the urge to repress can feel quite strong, and yet we train in simply being present with them. No running for the exits. Now, specifically about the precepts, they can be taken in a formal ceremony with a preceptor such as a Lama who holds the vows. But perhaps more importantly, one can take all, a few, or even just one of these vows anytime anyone chooses. For instance, on one of the great occasions of the Buddha's life, the 4 Buddhist holidays we celebrate throughout the year, would be ideal days to try to hold one or more of these vows. Or any full moon days, new moon days could be quite auspicious. But any day is a good day to practice with some of these vows. Or perhaps you like to try a week. Any engagement at all with these vows is good practice. And I would encourage you to try them on yourself in whatever way you think you're capable. Being certain to engage in both the outer renunciation prescribed by whatever precept you choose, and the inner renunciation of committing to stay present with how that feels. Outer renunciation, we should say, can be a path of pride and therefore cause further self-deception, going to sleep rather than waking up. I mean, outer renunciation alone. So it's really important that we commit to doing the inner work that goes along with the outer renunciation. So our renunciation actually has more power when we feel the pull towards speaking or acting out. That makes that renunciation more powerful. I would, we're getting short on time, but I would say take a moment, maybe even right now, try to think of a situation where you really wanted to speak or act out, and maybe you even did. But with the feeling of that situation in mind, try to simply be present with the idea of refraining from acting. Not burying the feeling, not repressing it, but examining it, being present with it. And if you can do this a little later on, or if you have pen and paper now, I would try to write down maybe 3 ways that you thought about escaping. Like, get familiar with like your go-to exit signs and write them down, keep them nearby. Because there are specific precepts, we can talk about not killing, not stealing, all these kinds of things, but you can also know which ways you've been trying to escape and choose for a period of time to not take those exits. This is one of the practices that Pema Chodron recommends, picking something and then picking an amount of time, whatever it is that's your escape, or one of your escapes. Choose to refrain reflectively from that for a short period of time. and connect with how it feels. Connect with that feeling of uncertainty, that groundlessness, because that is an authentic experience. That is connecting with the way things are. It's getting us closer to that. And we have so many opportunities for this stuff. As I said, shamatha is another good way to kind of work with this. The prayer that I said at the beginning, being present, feeling your heart, and engaging the next moment without an agenda. Shamatha practice, we place our attention on a support. We feel present. Not talking to you, Siri. Sometimes she just talks, but so we're present with the breath. And then when we notice a distraction, we're open and aware. So we have our attention placed somewhere, but we're also aware of whatever's happening around that support. So we bring our attention back. And in that coming back, that's something I've been saying a lot lately when I'm teaching shamatha. It's like, it's not necessarily about the placing, it's about the coming back in a lot of cases, because how we come back without an agenda, without a story, without a judgment, that has a whole lot to do with our success with the practice and with life in general, like experiencing that alternation, that motion, that change, and engaging each new moment without an agenda, without clinging to identity. So I think that's all we have time for. But I want to leave some time for questions, and I could stay past a half hour or two if people have questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
The concept of do no harm, it seems that for many cases it's rather easy, like not physically hurting someone or not screaming at someone. But I notice that sometimes I get angry at people just in my mind, like I'm not going to hit them and I'm not going to scream at them, but sometimes I notice that there's still some, little bit of being pissed at someone. So what do I do about that? I mean, how does that fit into do no harm?
Yeah, I can relate for sure. I think that I think it's normal to have those kinds of feelings, and I think that there's something to be said about keeping those thoughts in the mental realm and not letting them be expressed through speech and action. So first of all, I think there's something there, like we deserve a little credit when we can kind of catch them before they make it out into the world and affect other people. But you could also make a fair argument that has to have some impact on the world around us, right? Like, because if we're around people and we are angry and we don't say anything, like you kind of know when you're around people and they're angry at you.
True.
Like there is sort of a vibe. I think people can always tell more about our inner world than we think they can. And so I think the refraining in that case would be like a beneficial step there would be to think about how, like someone asked a question earlier today about when you encounter toxic people, how do you work with toxic people, particularly in like a workplace where you can't leave. And what I was thinking is that I think the first thing that has to happen is recognizing that, yeah, there's going to be these sensations of being around people who upset us, but then thinking, this emotion is coming from me. So what's really happening in me that's making me so resistant or aggressive towards other people, even just in my mind, and at least in a way owning that, like making it our own problem and not the other person's problem. If we can at least turn the table in that way, we can have a little sense of control of the situation that we otherwise externally may not have much control of. And it also, I think, helps us be a little more kind to the people that we're having these reactions to, because if we're recognizing that the emotions are ours, our reaction is ours, then we may not act out as much, or we may not act as unkindly. And then you can take the same steps we talked about today. Then we can do that kind of thing where, like, any story you have about an individual is riding upon a wave of energy, and we can just try to leave the thinking and the concepts and the story behind and try to just connect with that sensation that we've been labeling as dislike or uncomfortableness or unpleasantness. And this practice is a practice I've been doing for the last year and a half or so. And I probably should have been doing it long earlier. And I think I probably received a bunch of teachings about it and they just never really sunk in, or it didn't click for me really. But like doing this specific practice of like just trying to feel the non-conceptual energy, the felt sense of an emotion, an upswell of energy is a really interesting practice. And you start to see that you can do it with anything, but it's probably only going to be really brief. And then that story will come flooding back,
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
help a little bit? Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Yes.
I've been meditated for a long, long time, or pretending to be, and have always worked with this notion of what I think who me is, a self, is really an aggregate and does not really exist. However, I don't know the veracity of that, because when I shut my mind, or my eyes rather, and my mind, I'm very real. And I don't know if I would feel the difference if all of a sudden there magically I got the inner thinking of another person, of Pema Chodron, or you, or anyone else. Would I find that to be alien? Would I say, oh, this is not me? I mean, at that point, I would understand that I'm an aggregate. Short of that, I'm quite solid in my mind. And yes, I have many aspects of it, but all of that together is me for me. So is it a matter of many more lifetimes to shape that? Or have you, in your retreat, in your experience, have you managed to kind of dig down and find the root of that, and kind of shake it so that when you shut your eyes, the concept of you, which is so very familiar, is no longer that familiar, no longer that real. Have you?
Why, that would be great.
You know what I mean about, like, so yes, these ideas of I'm an aggregate and I don't exist, and yes, lovely, I love those ideas. We can write an entire book, and I could do that too. But the bottom line is, when I shut my eyes, I am very real to me.
Yeah. I mean, same here. I'm sad to say, but at the same time, that's where I think, when people ask about retreat, like my retreat experience, I always say like middle way. Like that's, if I got anything out of retreat, it was just a ton of teachings about finding the middle. And so one of the ways that's manifested for me is like really trying to believe wholeheartedly, that I'm already there, that I've already enlightened. Buddhahood is right here. But also at the same time, recognize that I don't feel that way, moment to moment. occasionally, very rarely, there may be like a flooding through of presence, like, and everybody, Rinpoche said in retreat several times that like most people have had some direct experience of Buddha nature. A lot of times we don't catch it, but or we definitely can't stabilize it. But we have had those genuine experiences. But that's why I think, like with this teaching today, like we need to know the ultimate goal, and we need to know the ultimate truth. But our actual experience is of this gravitational center of a self. We feel like we're kind of getting away, and then we pulled back in. And so how do we work with that? So that's why we need all these relative methods. We need these methods of working with these energies and having a relative reference point of the self and utilizing that relative reference point, because that is our experience. That doesn't make it any less true that we are, our nature is Buddha. But we need to use where we are. So I think that I think it's one of those situations where for me, like I just have to remind myself sometimes like that I've actually made it quite a long way, I think, in the 12 years only that I've been interacting with
Sure,
this.
I'm sure you have.
And I'm sure all of you have too. Like any amount of time with these practices can have a tremendous impact. And we've, just a little teeny bit of improvement with these practices, like I think most people, when they first learn to meditate, it's like a month later, you're like, wow, this is amazing, and that was when you were at the beginning of like the very beginning of the path. And then we think about how far we've come. And then the other balance thing that I have to think about all the time is that we're developing our awareness, which also means we're going to be more and more aware of all the times when we slip. And we're going to be more and more aware of all of our mistakes. And we're going to be more and more aware of all the things we still have to do. And so that's kind of one of the ironies of it, right? Is like, we actually notice more of the things we need to work on, the more our awareness grows. And that's our awareness that we're trying to cultivate, So I actually think it's, it's a fine place to be.
Yes, I understand your point, and I hear you. And I have been very fortunate, I guess, as many of us have, I'm sure, where I have had glimpses of the sky and glimpses of no clouds and the clarity, but only glimpses.
Yes.
And hanging on to those things.
Yeah.
Also, not a very good. Well, whatever it is what it is. But yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else?
Lama, Adam, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I was just thinking of her question, of Annie's question. And I think, isn't it, because I think she said like this experience of having no self, but am I wrong in thinking that awareness is always there? This is the thing which doesn't dissolve, the sort of ground awareness that you have. The problem is that we label it with other things and say, oh, I'm now this feeling and I'm now that feeling, but that will never, that's the whole point of it, that it is there I mean, I know I'm talking about maybe deeper terms, but in essence, if you sit in meditation and you feel yourself, and maybe if you're neutrally aware of yourself, then you are in this open space where you don't have a self, because you maybe can look at all the versions of you for a moment, I suppose. You know what I mean? Like when you say, when Annie said she felt like very solidly there, maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is sort of the base what you try to find. I don't know. That's just my thinking. So I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think there's something to that.
Mhm.
I do. I can't say that I think that's probably all I have to say, because I do think there's really something to that, but I don't know that I have much more to say about that. Charles, did you have? Yeah.
I'm just reminded, we've all had so many conversations with Rinpoche about this very subject. And, you know, his teaching kept bringing us back to trying to find the self. So Annie, when you get this strong feeling of this self being there, and it goes to Lama Adams' conversation, encouragement tonight to contemplate on that feeling, to actually delve into, and we've all been given the techniques to ask ourselves, where is this I? Okay, you've got that strong, you close your eyes at night, you've got that strong feeling of self. That's real. But where is the I? There's thinking about it. You can find the thinking because you can see that as the mind. But where's the self that is experiencing that thinking? I find when I have pain in my knees or wherever, that it provides a wonderful opportunity to try to find that self, because we don't like the pain, and pain is real. And then we say, well, I am suffering. But there's the opportunity to say, well, where's the I? There's no self that can be found. There's pain, yes, but there's no self, there's no being, there's no entity experiencing that pain. Pain is there. It's real. Thinking is there. It's real. But where is that additional thing that we label on top of it, which is a being or an entity or a self? And that's the insubstantial nature of the phenomena that's presenting itself to us. And that self cannot be found. And that's quite joyous to see the process unfolding, as Max referred to, that feeling of self is there. It's there all the time, or it's something, it's a ground that kind of we live by. But when we really investigate it, it dissolves. And there.
No,
Okay.
I don't want to stop. But okay, I've over the many years, I've given this a lot of thought. I is a linguistic phenomenon. It does not govern my thought. My feeling of me, is an aggregation. It's an aggregate. It's a combination. It's not a single thing. No single thing is me, but everything together, my reactivity or lack of reactivity, my likes, my dislikes, all of those things together make me. And if I were to take one portion out, am I still me? I know that argument as well, and we can go on down to the last fraction. Once everything has gone, but in my mind, it's solid. And my notion of me is quite solid, and it is it's indivisible almost. I have done many exercises on, my back is hurting me and I'm unable to sleep. And what is it that is hurting? And so on and so forth. After a while, you don't get gray hairs for nothing because you've been thinking about all the stuff. And so, I'm still working on it, but I have no issues about me being an aggregate, me being a consolidation of things. There are languages where there is no me, there's no I, the expression. So English does not limit me. My notion of my sense of me, and when I do something, say something bad or do something wrong, I feel the friction in me that this was not me. This was not generated by my compassion, by my dedication and commitment to doing no harm. to being kind. So I understand what you are saying, but my heart doesn't. My head understands, but my heart still says, hey, there's an Ani, I know her.
I know, and I know what you're talking about. So, I think we're all in the same boat. I mean, that's.
Yes, we're trying, right? We're trying. Hopefully this lifetime.
Well, and we're getting closer, and I think that's kind of the thing is like, there's all these little opportunities and everyone is worth it. And the distance from the final place to now is no reason not to engage every moment, as the potential breakthrough. Yeah.
There's no choice there.
Yeah.
Once you make your commitment, you take your refuge, you kneel down in front of your Lama. The die is cast. There's no amount of bleach that's going to take that die out.
I like that.
Amen.
Great. Yeah.
It makes me feel a little bit better because hearing all like Charles and Ani who have like been doing this for a really long time and sitting and having these concepts and thinking about them, because sometimes I feel like, what am I not getting here? Why I haven't got it yet. And then I hear the old school Dharma practitioners like, well, I've been doing this for this many years and I'm still trying. And it just helps me to know that it's okay, that it takes time. Everything takes time. The thoughts, the taking in of everything, like what you were talking about tonight, Lama Adam, was great. And I am going to contemplate all of it, but it's just so much. They're so rich that sometimes I want to get it immediately and I can't. But I kind of feel better when I hear other people say like, I'm still trying, whatever the concepts are. So thank you.
One teacher once said, my reaction to what you are saying, one teacher, unfortunately, I cannot remember. Any wisdom I may have is all whatever my teachers have taught me or I've gleaned from them. Just the fact that we have been this auspicious situation where we've been in the presence of a karmapa, we have been in the presence of a enlightened being, seen a Dalai Lama, that in itself is more than enough for one lifetime type of thing. So patience and commitment to your vows and commitment to your dedication to doing it, slugging it out, running a marathon. You just hunker down and you just do it. It doesn't matter. One of these days you'll get to the ending. You'll get to the finish line. So I always have to remind myself of this teaching that I'm fortunate. Yes, I'm not enlightened yet, but I have been fortunate to have heard Tai Situ Rinpoche, to have seen the Karmapa, so you are fortunate that we have Lama Adam here among us and sharing his progress, his enlightenment with us.
Path to. The path to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
So true. Thank
Well,
you.
should we, I think we probably should wrap up. So thank you. This is great. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to just have some discussion too. That's really nice. So thanks everybody. And thanks again for having me. And I want to honor, of course, like Ani was just saying, like I've kind of just rephrased everything I've heard enlightened beings say and hopefully do so accurately. So I confess any errors I may have made. They are strictly my own. And I rejoice in all the good works of all of our teachers and all the good works that we do in this room, all the practice we're doing. I request all our teachers to continue to teach and to remain for as long as possible. And with those thoughts in mind, let's dedicate the merit. By this merit, may all beings obtain the omniscience of Buddhahood and defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, may we free all beings.